Man, man. Well, as we keep building this thing, man, again, like you said, holistic earlier, and I'm feeling like we providing the audience with that holistic view of your journey. So, since we gonna leave Harvard, we gonna go a little bit towards DC, or a lot of it, we gonna go to DC in the present, man. Um, and we'll talk about the education trust. Is there any important but under the radar issue that is being addressed by policy that you could speak about?
Yeah,
And
man. And sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like I know everybody's focused on like student loan forgiveness, but that's just what's in the media. But if there's something else you can bring our attention to.
Yeah, yeah. One thing I'll mention, and I'll mention a win, because oftentimes policy can last years. It's a
Okay.
very delayed gratification type of role where there's people who have been in the space for years advocating for something, and it's just so slow moving that it'll be years later until you see anything come to fruition. So something that recently got addressed is that um, Pell Grants are now eligible to currently incarcerated individuals, where in the
Okay.
past that wasn't something. Like in the past it was, and then the crime bill in the 90s kind of twisted that. But people have been advocating that for years because, first of all, the criminal legal system disproportionately targets and impacts Black and Brown communities. Let's just say that off the top, right?
Facts.
So you
Facts.
have a bunch of brown and Black folk in these prisons and juvenile detention systems, what have you, and 95% of them are going to be released back into society. But what people don't often think about is like you're releasing them back into society, but with what?
Hmm.
Once you get in contact with the legal system, it's like a tentacle, bro. It keeps pulling you back, or it prevents you from like accessing housing, credit, loans, like public supports, like so many different things are impacted after you leave, like whatever carceral system you were in, and people don't often talk about that it needs to continue.
Yeah.
So I mentioned Pell Grants, and again, Pell Grant is like a federal grant, which is money you don't pay back, that's available to currently incarcerated individuals, and that helps them pursue an education degree or certificate while they're locked up. And this is helpful because, like, there's multiple studies that prove, when students or when incarcerated individuals like get an education while in prison, like their rate of going back into prison decreases a lot.
Yes.
The
Yes.
prison within itself, like the guards have actually said, like, it actually improves the ambiance and the vibe within the system, right? So there's less breakouts, there's less violence within it. But again, it's often more of like oh, they don't deserve it because of X, Y, Z.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? But that's something that I think is an important issue that got passed. That I think for me, who I'm in the policy space, and because like the work that I do is very racial justice and equity oriented, we have like a pulse on that. But for other
Hmm.
folks who may not be like, oh, they might not have think about, or they might not have people who have been locked up. They don't necessarily think about what they do when they're in there. So that's a win. That should be being rolled out, which is great. And hopefully but again, that's just the first step, because now you have all this influx of money. Now you got to make sure that the programs that are being offered to incarcerated individuals are of quality, not of
Okay.
quantity. So
Right.
it's like
Right.
you don't want for profits going in there. You don't want programs who don't show good job placement, who's going to get even more debt. Like now
Yeah.
it's just like, okay, this is the first step, but there's a long way to go, man. A long way to go. But that's just an important issue that, again, is a win. It got passed, but there's still more work to do.
Yes. Yes. And actually, I can see what you're saying as far as you giving people hope for when they done, because they in there, they doing their time, but when they out, I know a lot of people don't want to go back. I know my cousins don't want to go back. You know what I mean? And so when you have some type of certification or degree, that just helps your prospects, whether you end up becoming an entrepreneur or you trying to go to the 9 to 5 world. And you have a very precious resource while you're locked up, which resource is time, right? So putting time to use. Um, So no, that's dope, man. That's dope. Um, let me see here. Is it possible to walk us through the workflow at your agency? Is that too broad of a question, or is that
Nah. I think my answer will be broad, and I say it because it does depend on the project. And I
okay?
also think it depends across like the spectrum of organizations. So I'll give you an example of like if we're working on a brief, which is like, maximum 10 pages long. Uh, it's a whole effort, bro. Like from concepts that you just brainstorming. All right, what are we going to talk about? How are we going to analyze this? What is previous work that we've done that's in the field already? So we're not just
Yeah,
repeating things, we're
yeah.
inventing something new. And then from there, from the outline, it goes, we have like a communications team that's absolutely excellent and brilliant, where they provide their perspectives on like framing, like, you know, what is like like our organization framing for certain things.
Mm-hmm.
And they also provide just really great feedback on like, oh, a counter argument is this. So what would you say? Like, oh, don't forget about this. So they really polish it up. So it goes from outline, it goes through certain people, then it goes into like a draft or something. And that goes through the same process through the same communications people, the same people on our team. And we just keep doing that until it gets to a time where it's polished. And then from there, it goes to like the CEO. He kind of writes off on it. Then from there, once all of that is like kind of done and set, it goes through a design process. So it's not just writing things. It's like, okay, how do you make it look good? How do you make it digestible for many audiences, whether that's advocates, policymakers, students, parents? And again, that's conversations we have at the beginning. Like, who are we writing this for? And how are we
Yes.
doing it? We also think of different organizations that we partner with that might be experts in this. And we're like, hey, yo, like, are y'all willing to read this draft form of something? Like, what are your thoughts? From there, it goes into like making it look good. And we have a design team that's amazing as well. Once that starts getting finalized, it's another last read, make sure our citations are correct, make
Mm-hmm.
sure the links work, make sure it flows well. And then from there, something I never knew was like an embargoed copy, which I had no idea what it was, but it's like you essentially stamp it saying this is a final version, but now we're going to kind of like reach out to different people in media, be like, hey, we're about to release this. Like you get kind of like the first take at this. If you want to write something on there, like let me know. So then
Yeah.
that is where like we get tied into like media engagements. So like for example, for myself, like I've been able to interview with like Inside Higher Education for diverse issues in higher education, where like we're releasing something and they take of interest, so that we just hop on a call like now and be like, hey, we just want to talk to you about your report. How would you synthesize it? What's the main takes? And they just you talk about your work, and it gets like amplified in just different ways and different mediums. And then from there, it really is like you can submit it to conferences, presentations, you can slice it into op-eds. And for me, it really just comes down to like, who are we trying to impact and what's the best way to do it? And for me personally, it's like students and policymakers, like how do we connect those two experiences to be able to like talk to each other and influence each other? But that's kind of a breakdown of like outline, multiple drafts, then design, and then figuring out the strategy to bring it out into the world. Because you can't just drop, like, for example, can you imagine dropping a brief on like inauguration day? Like, it's not going to be read. You know what I'm saying? If you drop a brief at certain times, like, it's just, there's other things within the world that are going on. So that's
Yes.
where the communication comes in of like framing and timing of when to release it and how to release it.
Mm-hmm.
And I should also mention like tech, we have like a tech team as well, social media team. So they'll build a tab on the website, they'll upload things, they'll send it out in newsletters, like all of that stuff that's like way beyond my skill set, but they are also very critical in making sure like the link works, because you can have a dope brief, but if the link doesn't work to it, no one can read it. So it's a whole team effort, man.
Yes, yes. And again, like you started it off perfect with like talking about a holistic mindset or a holistic team, right? And just a couple of things that you mentioned. Um, y'all got the information, y'all got smart people on your team. Okay, now how do we communicate that information to these various channels, right? And that's so important because being in a semi-educational space myself, the biggest thing I see is like not people's intelligence. They don't know where to look, or they're so busy with other issues of life it doesn't occur to them, hey, let me dig through this website for 15 minutes. That's not top on their priority list, right? So if you can make something attractive and the wording is something that they can get right away, okay, now we creating a force. You know what I'm saying? Because people are informed and now they can make an informed decision. So no, I really was able to picture again how the sausage is made, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? I can see the factory, man. I can see the factory.